I'm honored to be joined this morning by a guest who can only be described as a political lightning rod to those on both the left and the right. Everyone knows he's Professor Emeritus at Harvard University. He's a constitutional scholar. Professor Dershowitz, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join me.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
You know, a lot of people who watch Crowdsource the Truth have been very troubled by what we see as gross constitutional abuses. You said when you spoke on behalf of the Constitution during the presidential, the impeachment process, that you were not a Trump supporter, and I actually really appreciated you speaking out in defense of the president despite your politics, his personality, and that sort of thing. We've got another similar situation with Michael Flynn, and there have been some surprising developments in the case lately. Can you speak to us about the constitutionality of what is happening with Emmett Sullivan and Michael Flynn?
Sure, and I'm not a Flynn supporter. I was appalled at Flynn being one of those people during the recent election, the last election, being among those people shouting, lock her up to Hillary Clinton. That wasn't right. And so I'm not here to defend Flynn. I don't know him. I've never met him. But what Judge Emmett Sullivan is doing is clearly in violation of the Constitution's separation of powers. Judges are umpires. They're supposed to resolve only disputes between the government and a defendant. Here, there's no dispute. The government and the defendant agree the case should be dismissed for essentially egregious government misconduct. There was no crime. What he testified to or spoke to the FBI about was not material. He was denied several of his rights. And Attorney General Barr did the right thing by dismissing the prosecution. But even if he did the wrong thing, it would not be the business of the court, essentially. Courts don't have a roving commission to go around and do good. They're there as umpires. When you're a judge, you're not the commissioner of baseball. You're just an umpire in a particular game. You're calling balls and strikes. And if the pitcher says, I'm going to intentionally walk the next batter, the umpire can't say, no, I think you ought to pitch to him. That's not the job of the umpire. The umpire is to resolve disputes. The job of the judge is to resolve disputes. So Judge Sullivan, who has a clear bias, personal bias, against Flynn. What he said about him was outrageous. He accused him of treason. He made all kinds of statements about him even earlier on. But now, inviting another judge to come and become a special prosecutor, inviting amicus to come in and give him cover basically for what he'd like to do, which is to send Flynn to jail. That's just not what a judge is supposed to do.
Has anything like that ever occurred in your experience, Professor Dershowitz? It almost seems as if Judge Sullivan is kind of hiring his own attorney to argue against the Department of Justice that now has determined they're going to drop the charges.
I've never quite seen that. Look, I've seen plenty of judicial abuse in my day. I wrote a book in 1982 called The Best Defense, where I talk about judges being the essentially most dangerous branch of our government. Chapter in the book was Black Robes, White Lies. And I've been a critic of the judiciary, as I have been of prosecutors and of government in general for my 55 years of public life. But this goes about as far as anything I've ever seen. Recently, the United States Supreme Court, in a 9-0 decision, chastised judges for doing this kind of thing. They said judges are supposed to play a passive role. This is a unanimous decision written by an activist judge, written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. But she went out of her way in an opinion just a couple of weeks ago, 9-0, to say that the job of the judge is to be passive and to resolve disputes. The judge is not supposed to go out every day looking for new injustices to try to cure. That's the job of law enforcement. That's the job of the government. That may be the job of the legislature. It is not the job of the judiciary.
Right. And this judge that Emmett Sullivan is bringing in, he's quite controversial, isn't he? This is one of the judges that Bill Clinton hired as a U.S. attorney when he fired all 93 coming in as president. That had never been done before Bill Clinton did it. Right.
Well, now happening more often. I think we're seeing a politicization of our legal system. I've only heard good things about Judge Gleason. When he served as a judge in the Eastern District, he was highly regarded. I have no complaints about him, nor do I have any complaints about him doing a job that he was asked to do by another judge. My complaint is with Judge Sullivan for stacking the deck, bringing in a former judge to argue a position that he, the judge, supports, bringing in amicus who will be very partisan. These are amicus that will be academics. They would be praising the Attorney General's decision if it had been made on behalf of, quote, President Hillary Clinton's national security advisor, if the shoe were on the other foot. Most of these academics would not pass the test of shoe on the other foot. Their academic reasoning tends to differ depending on who the president is and whose ox is being gored. I think I can proudly say my legal views never change depending on who the president is or on partisan considerations. I espouse the same principles I have for the last 50 or so years. For years and years and years, I've argued judges have no role to play when there's no dispute. For years and years and years, I've argued that a statement that's not true is not a crime if it's not material. This is not new. This is all arguments I've made in teaching and litigating and writing over 50 years. The reason people are complaining so bitterly about me is I'm now making these arguments that help the current administration. I'm not doing it to help the administration. I'm doing it to help the Constitution.
Yeah. And I think we should also say your new book is called Guilt by Accusation. People can get it for free on Amazon.com. You've made it available both through Audible and Kindle, so as many people as possible can read this. It talks about the challenges of proving innocence in the age of Me Too. But Professor Dershowitz, I would say it almost applies to an even broader spectrum, the challenge of proving innocence in the age of social media, where virtually anyone has a platform to spread information. And the average citizen really, whether you're Michael Flynn, Alan Dershowitz, or Jason Goodman, it's very difficult to defend against these false and defamatory accusations.
Sure, just go online and you see the names that people call me. I have proved definitively, categorically, and beyond any doubt that I never met the woman who accused me. She admits it in a manuscript that she wrote. She says she met me once. No, she says she saw me once. She never met me. She saw me once talking to Jeffrey Epstein about business. Of course, I never spoke to Jeffrey Epstein about business. I had no business with him. I was his lawyer, but that was years later. She admits in emails that she never heard of me, didn't know I was. She had to be told who I was, that I wrote Reversal of Fortune, that I'm famous, and she should include me in her book. Her lawyer admits on tape, she's wrong, simply wrong. You couldn't have been in the places she was. The former head of the FBI did a thorough study and concluded that her claims were unfounded. The evidence is overwhelming that I never met her. You get on Twitter, you get on social media, and people are calling me a rapist and a criminal and you name it, every name in the book. They don't care about the evidence once you've been accused. The 92nd Street Y, where I spoke for 25 years, I was the second most popular speaker after Elie Wiesel, banned me from speaking.
Wow.
Knowing that I was completely innocent. They said, we know you didn't do this, but you've been accused and we don't want trouble. So that's where I got the title for my book, From the 92nd Street Y. If you're accused, guilty, we don't care about the evidence. That's not relevant. It's Alice in Wonderland, sentence first, verdict, and then the evidence. I wrote a column the other day. It could have been entitled, Don't Believe Women, but also Don't Believe Men. Believe the evidence. There's nothing about a woman that makes her more truthful than a man, or about a man that makes him more truthful. It would be like saying, don't believe Jews, or don't believe gays, or don't believe African Americans, or believe Republicans, believe Democrats. It's nonsense. You can't say believe or don't believe based on stereotypical groups. Believe the evidence. Believe credible witnesses. That's what I urge in my book, Guilt by Accusation. I hope people will read it. I've made it available free because I want everybody to read it. It could happen to you. It could happen to me. It could happen to you. It could happen to anybody.
Well, it has happened to me, and that's part of the reason why I've become so interested in your case. I didn't know very much about you before this whole dust-up began. Of course, I watched the OJ trial, and some of the things that you're saying bring me to my next question. I think it's important that we reiterate for people that some of the controversy I'm referring to when I introduced you is that you've represented some of the most well-known criminal defendants in American history. And I want people to remember that rather than forming an opinion about you based on who you're representing, it's very important that if each of us want to live by this rule of being presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond the shadow of a doubt, or a reasonable doubt, even people suspected of the worst crimes deserve that. They require that. Isn't that correct?
Well, look at our history. John Adams, before he became president, before he signed the Declaration of Independence, defended the most despised people in all of America. That is, the British troops who committed the Boston Massacre, killing Crispus Attucks and many other people, innocent people. And because they needed a lawyer and because they were so unpopular in Boston, John Adams, who was a great lawyer, defended them and was castigated for doing it. Abraham Lincoln defended many people who were despised. Clarence Darrow defended some of the most despised people in history. I'm happy to try to follow in their great footsteps. I will continue to defend the most despised, the most unpopular, the most hated people as long as I have the energy to do so. That's the job of a criminal defense lawyer, just like it's the job of a great doctor to try to cure the sickest people, and a priest or a rabbi or a minister to try to administer to the worst people. The job of the criminal lawyer is to defend the people who are most unpopular, who will have the most difficulty getting a fair trial, whether they're guilty, innocent, or somewhere in between. And of course, when we take a case, we don't know whether the defendant is guilty. That only comes out when we see the evidence. And I've been surprised both ways. I can think of one major case, I'm not going to mention names, where I took the case thinking the defendant was absolutely guilty, and then I learned he was totally innocent. There was no crime. And I had another case where I was sure the defendant was innocent, and then it became very clear, and he admitted it to me, that he had done it. And we won that case. We won that case because the evidence was obtained unconstitutionally. And so these gray areas come up all the time. Guilty, but unconstitutional. Gray area, maybe guilty, maybe not guilty. It's up to the courts to determine that. It's up to the defense attorneys to put on the most vigorous ethical defense.
Right. And, you and I first met outside the courthouse at 500 Pearl Street after one of the hearings in Giffrey v. Dershowitz, and you were very forthcoming in your answers to some uncomfortable questions that a lot of people might not have wanted to answer.
Not uncomfortable to me. I did nothing wrong. I have lived an exemplary life when it comes to the matters involved with these accusations. I've been married for 30 some odd years, together with the same woman for many, many years. I don't flirt. I don't touch. I don't smell people's hair. I don't hug. I have never had sex with an underage person in my life. I never had sex with anybody related to Jeffrey Epstein. I did absolutely nothing wrong. Why should I be afraid to answer questions? I immediately, the day I was accused, said, open book, look at anything, read anything, listen to anybody. Nothing should be secret. I have nothing to be ashamed of. And that's why I wrote my book. If I were guilty, I wouldn't have written a book opening myself up to all kind of criticism, and I wouldn't have sued Virginia Giuffre for defaming me, which I have done. And now there are lawsuits between me and her and between me and her lawyer, David Boies, because I accused him of conduct which many, many, many people believe he is guilty of.
Yes, and it's interesting to me that a lot of people have rallied around David Boies as some kind of hero, because he is also defending a lot of people that a lot of viewers of Crowdsource the Truth aren't very fond of. It just seems like a lot of people get into these identity politics type scenarios where if they look at somebody on TV and decide they like them, that person is a hero and their adversary is a villain. But it's basically the business of criminal defense attorneys to defend people who are accused of crimes, and they may not be popular.
But to defend them ethically, I have no problem with who David Boies defends. I have a real problem with how he defends them. He's being sued now for malpractice. He's been brought up on ethics numerous times for allegedly deeply unethical conduct. And so far, he's gotten away with it. But he's not going to get away with it in my case, because when he sued me, he opened himself up for me exposing his entire career. So it's not who he defends, it's how he defends and whether he violates ethical principles. And that will be the issue presented at the trial. I do not violate ethical principles. I have never had a complaint filed against me in 50 years of actively litigating all kinds of cases. And David Boies can't say that.
Right. And you mentioned that despite not being a Flynn supporter, you're defending the constitutional aspects of what's going on with him. You dislike the fact that Flynn was wanting Hillary Clinton to be locked up. I need to ask you, Professor Dershowitz, about your involvement with this letter that was written on behalf of Jeffrey Epstein, which stated that he was one of the founding members of the Clinton Global Initiative. Is this something that you're able to speak about? Does attorney-client privilege?
No, I don't. I'm not sure I understand what you're talking about. Who was part of the Global Initiative?
Well, this is an article from Yahoo News that says billionaire financier Jeffrey Epstein, who was indicted Monday on child sex trafficking charges, helped President Bill Clinton devise the Clinton Global Initiative, according to a letter his attorney sent to federal prosecutors in 2007. Yahoo News says you and Gerald Lefcourt wrote this letter, which said that Mr. Epstein was part of the original group that conceived of the Clinton Global Initiative. Is that correct?
I don't know. It may be true. I didn't write the letter. I was his lawyer, so my name may have been attached to the letter, but I don't have any personal knowledge. I know that Epstein and Clinton were very, very close. I remember a situation. This is a name-dropping story where I was having dinner. My wife and I were having dinner with Caroline Kennedy at Caroline Kennedy's home on Martha's Vineyard, and the President Clinton, was there, and he received a phone call. The Secret Service gave him the phone, and he went off on the side, and he had a long conversation, and then he came over to me. President Clinton did, and said, "Somebody wants to talk to you." I said, "Who?" He said, "Well, get on the phone." And it was Jeffrey Epstein, who had been talking to the president for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes before the phone was handed to me. And then he just asked me how I was doing. I had met him on the Vineyard through Lady Rothschild, the wife of the Lord Rothschild, who told me he was this wonderful man. He had connections to Harvard. He was very charitable. He was giving $30 million to Harvard. Would I do her a favor and meet with him? And I did. I met with him at my house. He left a bottle of champagne, which I still haven't opened, and probably won't ever drink. But I had an academic relationship with him until he was arrested. Then the relationship stopped being in any way academic or personal and became entirely professional. I charged him for every minute that I spent on his case, gave him no discounts, and produced a very good result. I'm very proud of the result we produced. That's my job.
And were you representing him in 2007 when this letter that Yahoo News?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
Isn't it a concern, Professor Dershowitz, if your name is on a letter as his lawyer? This Clinton Global Initiative was never legally organized and has no...
I don't know anything about it. It's very common. It's the first I've known about this particular relationship. I've heard that he was involved with Clinton's fundraising. I know I think they flew to Asia together for some Clinton initiative matter, but you have to ask other people about that. I just don't know about it. It's probably true if it was in the letter. And, this is 13 years ago. So I have no current record. But I would not be nothing embarrassing about that. If he was part of the Clinton Global Initiative, it would be the right thing.
Well, it's an illegally organized... It's an illegally organized violation of the IRS's code relating to 501c3 charities.
Well, I didn't know anything about that.
Let's move on. Let's move on from that.
Yeah.
I wanted to speak with you briefly about what's going on in New York right now, where I believe you live, maybe Massachusetts, you don't have to tell us. I went to a protest, a peaceful protest at City Hall just a little over a week or two ago, and the park was shut down. You can see there was no violence going on, but the police basically informed me, a plainclothes officer informed me that the park was closed. He showed me no badge, even when I asked to see it. And he said that despite the fact that I was standing there talking to a 70-year-old woman calmly and having a polite conversation, no one was even arguing, they closed the park, they kicked us out. They told me that if I didn't leave, I could take it up with a judge, which I took to mean they would arrest me, throw me in a concrete box, and allow me to speak to a judge about the Constitution on Monday, since this was a Friday. Is Governor Andrew Cuomo allowed to shut down the Constitution because of allegations of a virus that certain medical professionals argue against?
Let's be very clear how we break down this issue. The city of New York, the state of New York, has the power to close a park based on their view that it would be helpful in defeating the pandemic. Absolutely no question about that. The Supreme Court has case after case after case saying that public health justifies closing down parks, closing down public areas. The next question is, does the governor have the right to do that? Governors generally are not authorized to make the law. They're authorized to enforce the law. So you'd have to look to see if there were legislative authority allowing the governor to close the park. If there is, then it would be legitimate. Let me put it very clearly. You have no constitutional right to endanger the public and spread a disease, even if you disagree. You have no right not to be vaccinated. You have no right not to wear a mask. You have no right to open up your business.
Wait, can I stop you? No right not to be vaccinated? Meaning if they decide you have to be vaccinated, we have to be vaccinated?
Absolutely. And if you refuse to be vaccinated, the state has the power to literally take you to a doctor's office and plunge a needle into your arm. If the vaccination
Where is that in the Constitution?
If the vaccination is designed to prevent the spreading disease. If the vaccination is only to prevent a disease that you will get, for example, if there's a disease that will kill you, you have the right to refuse that, but you have no right to refuse to be vaccinated against a contagious disease. Public health, the police power of the Constitution, gives the state the power to compel that. And there are cases in the United States Supreme Court. Case that pops into my head, I may have the name wrong, is Jacobson. I think probably I have it right. Check it out. You'll see that there are cases after cases after cases that the public health permits reasonable actions to prevent the spread of communicable diseases. Most of them grow out of tuberculosis cases in the early 20th century, but some are more recent than that. But there's still an issue of whether the governor has the authority to create laws, and that's a matter of state legislation. Yeah.
But you've opened up a whole new area here. So
right.
The governor has the right, the government has the right to force someone to be vaccinated. But how do we know what they're providing us from a medical standpoint is accurate? There are doctors who argue that Anthony Fauci is totally wrong in his assessment, and it certainly seems like week to week, month to month, they don't seem to know anything about this virus.
I agree with that. I mean, I think there's a lot. I wrote an article early on pointing out two fundamental errors right away. But that's what a democracy is about. And if the majority of the people agree and support that for public health measures, you have to be vaccinated, you have to be vaccinated. They should give you an alternative. The alternative is to live in your home. Don't get vaccinated, but never, ever leave your home or live in a bubble. But if you want to interact with other people, you cannot become Typhoid Mary. The Constitution doesn't give you the right to spread your illness to other people. And you can disagree. You can be a dissenter. You can leave the country. You can go into a bubble. But what you can't do is say, I don't disagree. I don't agree with Fauci. Therefore, I'm going to take the law into my own hands and decide to spread the disease. That's not a constitutional right. Sorry.
But Professor Dershowitz, how can you support a law that's made on the determination by a doctor? If you went to the doctor today and he determined that we need to chop off your leg, wouldn't you get a second opinion before you went and did what that doctor said?
I wouldn't have him. I wouldn't even listen to that doctor. We're not talking about it based on a doctor. We're talking about it based on a legislature, based on the legislature's decision being upheld by the highest courts and by the Supreme Court. We're talking about democracy. Doctor doesn't make the decision. The decision is made by the government through democratic means. And if the decision is made by the government, if they told you you had to cut off your leg, that would be unconstitutional because your leg doesn't help them. Let's assume the doctor says to you, unless you cut off your leg, you'll die. You have a right to die. You don't have to cut off your leg. But if the doctor says, unless you cut off your leg is contagious and will spread your disease to many, many, many other people, that's a completely different issue. Constitution.
But if this legislation is based on the determinations made by doctors and they've determined something about, we're mixing the fields of medicine and law, and the proof of something in law seems vastly different than the proof of something in medicine. A lot of the people who are advising us as to the future of vaccinations in this country are the very same people who have been kicked out of major countries for serious failures and injuries resulting from vaccines that they felt were going to be beneficial. I'm very troubled by the legality of what you're suggesting because it seems like we're very close to a government mandate that we must all be vaccinated. Let me take you in another direction here.
I would like to see a government mandate. If a safe vaccine is developed for COVID-19, I hope it's mandated. And I will defend it and will argue that in the Supreme Court of the United States against your views.
And you would get it if they came out tomorrow and said there's a vaccine that's ready?
First one online, my children would get it, everybody would get it. If we felt it was safe, we'd make our own, obviously, make our own judgment. If we decided to become civil disobedience and violate the law, that would be a different thing, but the law would be completely valid.
I know you have limited time, so let me ask you about this other professor at Harvard, Charles Lieber. He's been indicted. Sorry?
Never heard of him.
Oh, Charles Lieber is one of the world's leading experts in nanotechnology. He has been indicted along with two of his Chinese students who, well, let me just bring you up to speed.
Sure.
Two of his Chinese students who failed to declare on their student visa applications that they were members of the Chinese military. Dr. Lieber's group, in their research in the area of nanotechnology, have created robots that are smaller than viruses, that can actually enter cells and carry out functions within the cell. And we have the very realistic possibility, Professor Dershowitz, that there are nanotechnology groups around the world, and actually a high concentration of them at Harvard University, that are creating these nanobots that could behave exactly like a virus and could even mimic some of the symptoms and impact that we're seeing from COVID-19. So I'm very concerned when the law can get behind this and force us to take a vaccine for something that's so misunderstood from a medical standpoint.
Well, I want to make sure it's well understood, and I don't think we'd ever get legislation passed unless there was a very, very widespread consensus across the board. Remember how hard it is to get legislation enacted in this country. You've got to get the House of Representatives. You've got to get the Senate to approve the same language that the House approves. You got to get the president to sign the bill. Then you got to get the courts to uphold it. Once all of those checks and balances have been satisfied, that's the democracy we live in. And, if you don't like it, there are other places you can go to.
Not really. They won't let us leave New York. Let me ask you this, because
you can leave New York. You can leave New York if you tell them you want to give up your American citizenship and go to another country. You can leave New York. Yeah.
Let's stay focused on this research for a second.
Right.
So in this visit to Harvard, we've got Jeffrey Epstein wearing this sweatshirt. It seems like this is the same room, the same sweatshirt, the same day. We've got Marvin Minsky here, who is a world-renowned, he's deceased now, but he was a world-renowned expert in artificial intelligence and robotic haptics.
And Jeffrey Epstein, yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like Jeffrey Epstein was very involved in some of these leading scientists at Harvard, and he has been accused by many of using sexual blackmail against people. So when I hear about...
I've never heard of that. I've never heard that claim made.
Well, there are alleged to be video recordings of people from the jet.
I hope there are video recordings of everything that Jeffrey Epstein ever did with anybody, because that would be my best evidence. Look, he was friendly with Frank Church, who was the developer of the genome project. He was friendly with so many scientists. He fooled a lot of people into thinking that he had lived a perfectly normal life. And we were all, I can speak for myself, totally shocked when we learned about some of the activities. And he was friendly with Bill Gates. He was friendly
Right.
with.
But the fact is, he engaged in these activities, and Bill Gates seems to be connected to each of the people that I'm speaking about: Charles Lieber, Marvin Minsky, millions and millions of dollars to Harvard.
I've never met Bill Gates. Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that you've met Bill Gates. I'm just saying that Jeffrey Epstein has met Bill Gates.
Sure.
In the book Filthy Rich by James Patterson, he says that Jeffrey Epstein had a trading floor on his 727 jet. Now, of course, that's going to mean there's just a computer data center there. I don't know if James Patterson would necessarily know a trading floor from a video server, but there are allegations that Jeffrey Epstein recorded things that happened all over his house. There's been a former...
I hope so. That would be great. Yeah.
Palm Beach County Sheriff's deputy who has produced video footage allegedly to have come from Jeffrey Epstein. And I mean, we're hearing about nanotechnology developed by Harvard scientists that could enter a cell, behave like a virus. We've got Bill Gates pushing this plan for a virus. We've got him funding Anthony Fauci, the CDC, the NIH, the WISP.
Sounds like a theory involving a dead man who probably...
Well, it sounds more like a conspiracy, because here we've got two people. How did Jeffrey Epstein get this $500 million fortune? Charles Ortel tells us there's no records of him conducting any trades at all. He never graduated from college, as far as we know, but yet he was a professor at Dalton School, allegedly hired by Donald Barr, the father of our current Attorney General. Can you address the relationship between Donald Barr and Jeffrey Epstein?
Never heard anything like that. I didn't know Epstein when he was teaching at a high school or an elementary school. I mean, these are all absurd conspiracy theories. Epstein made his money by working for Leslie Wexner. You should ask Leslie Wexner how he made his money. He got a percentage, as far as I know, of all the money that he handled for Leslie Wexner. And then I know he got the house that Leslie Wexner had once owned. There's a dispute about how much he paid for it and all of that. But his money came, I think, largely from Leslie Wexner. That's what the evidence seems to show.
Right. Donald Barr was the headmaster at Dalton School. He left right before Jeffrey Epstein joined as a professor. It's notable that he...
You mean a high school teacher?
High school teacher, sorry. A math professor, a high school teacher, whatever we want to call him. But you didn't have a master's degree in teaching. A lot of people have a lot of questions about what this relationship...
He never went to, I mean, I'm not sure he ever met this Barr guy, but I know that he didn't have a college degree, and he was a very brilliant guy, very smart guy, very good at mathematics, but you have to ask the right people those questions. Ask the people from the Dalton School why they hired him. Ask the people from Bear Stearns why they hired him. There's a lot of mystery around Jeffrey Epstein, but the idea that he would be dealing in nanotechnologies with Marvin Minsky. Marvin Minsky was the developer of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, I think he was dealing with artificial intelligence. With Minsky, it would have been Charles Lieber with nanotechnology. Along the lines of the surprises, were you as surprised as everybody else when Alexander Acosta announced publicly that he was instructed to lay off Epstein because he was involved in intelligence?
It was not true. There's no truth to it. Epstein was not involved in intelligence, and I don't think that anybody in the government ever told him to lay off Epstein. Nobody laid off Epstein. We got the deal because we had a stronger case. They couldn't prove that he had ever transported any particular woman in interstate commerce who was underage for purposes of sex. And so if you can't prove that, you can't make your case. I do think I've only met Acosta one or two occasions. I do think he got a bum rap. I think he did what he could do. He got the best deal he could possibly get. If he had demanded more, we would have gone to trial and probably would have gotten a total acquittal.
Right. And so Jeffrey Epstein, despite his close relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell, you're saying unequivocally was not involved in CIA, Mossad, nothing like that?
No, of course not. He had no connections to the Mossad. He had no connections to the CIA. He had no connections to intelligence. As far as I know, I mean, when I was his lawyer, he told me a great deal about things he had done, and he did totally deny that. If it was true, he would have bragged about it. He would have used it. He would have benefited from it. I don't believe it for a second.
But isn't it true that Robert Maxwell was a prominent Mossad asset, agent, something like this? He's alleged to have been.
He died years before any of this happened.
But he's always pictured with his beloved daughter, and she seems to be
Wouldn't you
good.
be pictured with your beloved daughter? I'm pictured with my beloved daughter. To make the connection between Maxwell's alleged connection to the Mossad and Jeffrey Epstein, I don't even know if Jeffrey Epstein ever met Maxwell.
Right. Well, there have been a lot of strange things that have happened with Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't know if you saw this photo of her at an In-N-Out Burger in Los Angeles, but it appeared in the New York Post, and there were a number of problems with this from an evidentiary standpoint. This photo appeared in 2019, and I'm sure you're aware Ghislaine Maxwell is about 57 years old. This is quite obviously a retouched photo, and her complexion is not the only element of it that's been altered. When I brought this to the attention of the journalists at the New York Post and Ghislaine Maxwell's attorney, they all behaved very strangely. She's reading a book called The Secret Lives of CIA Operatives. When you go to Amazon.
Which attorney did you speak to?
Leah, what's her last name? She's in Ventura County. Leah, I forget her last name, but her information was on this photograph. She had taken the photograph, which the New York Post said was taken.
What's the relevance of the photograph? Let's assume it's a fake photograph. What does it show?
The New York Post is publishing a false story that seems to be, well, why is the question that I've been trying to ask. But when I asked that question, In-N-Out Burger threatened to sue me and threatened to bring criminal action against me, which I think is a violation of the California Code of Ethics.
How can they possibly sue for expressing an opinion or bring criminal charges for expressing an opinion?
Because I called In-N-Out Burger and spoke to their media representative and asked if they would provide video footage from their surveillance system to the FBI so that people could locate Ghislaine Maxwell. She was accused of all kinds of things, and this was right after Jeffrey Epstein had died. I would think that the FBI would want to question one of his closest associates, but instead, it seemed like the New York Post was publishing an article that was filled with strange errors, at least, if not deliberate lies.
For what reason? Because the Post is part of the conspiracy as well?
Well, now you seem like you're sort of making fun of what I'm saying, but I don't know the reason, Professor Dershowitz. I'm just telling you what happened. Ghislaine Maxwell was seen at an In-N-Out Burger just days after Jeffrey Epstein, her close accomplice and suspected intelligence operative, was found dead. She's reading a book called The Book of Honor, Secret Lives and Deaths of CIA Operatives. And when you go here to the Amazon.com book reviews, the first one is written by Ghislaine Maxwell. So I'm not making this up. You can call it a conspiracy theory if you like, but I believe this is a steganographic message that Ms. Maxwell has left here for someone.
She's reading a book, and then she writes a review of the book for Amazon. I do that all the time. When I read a book, I like
And
the
does
book.
it get published on the cover of the New York Post with a retouched photo that is alleged to be taken by a bystander that I have evidence it was taken by her attorney? And when I ask the reporters at the New York Post, they don't follow up with a correction. They hang up the phone on me.
You ought to report this to the proper authorities. I think we're really getting into conspiracy land. Do you have any other questions to me about something that I know something about?
I think that might be all the questions I have for right now. I thought these were things that you would know about. Thanks, Professor Dershowitz. Have a nice day. I'm sorry if he didn't like those questions, but those were the questions. Anyway, so there we go. I didn't have a lot of time to look at the comments here, but ending it by calling me a conspiracy theorist is not impressive. Appreciate Professor Dershowitz taking time out of his Saturday to join me. I think he might have known some more things about some of that stuff than what he was letting on. Thanks for watching, everybody. Do me a favor. If you like this interview, if you watch Crowdsource the Truth and you're not yet a sponsor, get onto subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. I can't keep bringing you stories like this without viewer sponsorship. I don't think Fox News would allow me to ask Alan Dershowitz a lot of questions about what the hell is going on with the New York Post. I don't think CNN would. I don't think any corporate sponsor wants me to do this kind of thing. And also, social engineers out there are trying to stop you from seeing what I'm doing. So it's very important that people become sponsors of Crowdsource the Truth. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, everybody. Don't miss Sunday with Charles tomorrow.